What happened when an undercover CEO missed her ferry and a stranger gave up his shot at a new life just to help her? Welcome, brilliant listeners. You have an eye for stories that matter. In today's tale, quiet kindness meets unexpected power, as a coal worker's small act of compassion sparks a global transformation. If you believe it's never too late to begin again, or that character still counts in a world chasing credentials, this story is for you. Sit back, stay curious, and let's explore how a missed ferry became the journey of a lifetime. Caleb Monroe stood in the long, uneven line at Seattle's Bainbridge Ferry Terminal, clutching a worn leather folder to his chest like a life vest. Inside were his only printed resumes, cleaned up and retyped at the public library, the last physical proof that he was still trying. The sea air bit through his flannel shirt, and the ache in his knees reminded him how long he'd been standing, walking, surviving. Once he managed coal boilers in West Virginia with steady hands and quiet pride. Now, after 3 plant closures and a string of part-time warehouse gigs, Caleb had sold his tools, pawned his guitar, and spent his last $86.00 on this trip. He had a job interview with Sunflux Innovations, a new solar firm that might not change the world, but could just change his one position. Dozens of applicants, and all he had to do was catch this last ferry and show them he was still worth betting on. He checked the time again. 19 minutes. He could make it. His boots scuffed against wet pavement as he adjusted his pack and pushed through the crowd. That's when he saw her. An older woman, maybe late 70s, was stranded near the entry ramp, silver hair askew under a knitted beret, trying to juggle 3 oversized canvas bags. One had tipped over, spilling out a thermos and a small notebook. People swept past her like she didn't exist. A businessman dodged her luggage with a huff. A mother yanked her child's hand away from the mess. Caleb's eyes darted to the clock again. He could pretend he didn't see. He could keep walking. That job interview was everything. But instead his boots stopped moving. He turned back. "Ma'am," he said gently, bending down to gather her things. "Need a hand?" Her blue eyes met his, sharp and startling against the weathered lines of her face. "Oh, thank you, young man, these bags. They've gotten heavier since I packed them," she said, with a smile that was more tired than amused. Caleb smiled back, but his stomach was already sinking. He knew he was risking more than a missed ferry. He was risking the future he'd barely begun to believe in again. The terminal clock ticked louder in Caleb's head with every step they took toward the other pier. He balanced 2 of the woman's heavy bags with practiced ease, the kind that comes from decades of labor, while she carried a smaller one with careful, deliberate steps. Her name, she said, was Eleanor. Just Eleanor. She spoke with the composed elegance of someone used to being listened to, yet who no longer expected it. Caleb tried to ignore the knot in his chest, the one tightening with every passing second. He had 12 minutes left, then 10, then 8. The ferry horn blared once in the distance, a low, haunting sound that struck him like a warning bell in an old mine. Eleanor stopped to catch her breath near a bench outside a tiny coffee kiosk. "I didn't eat this morning," she admitted, her voice suddenly faint. "Got myself all worked up." Without a second thought, Caleb set the bags down. "Wait here," he said, already fishing a crumpled $5 bill from his wallet. He bought her tea and, against better financial judgment, added a blueberry scone. "They looked fresh," he explained when he returned, handing her the warm paper bag. She smiled genuinely now and reached into her purse to pay, but he waved her off. "My treat. Just rest a minute." They sat side by side on the bench, the ferry to Bainbridge now boarding just across the bay. Caleb's leg bounced. He didn't need to look to know he was too late. Eleanor sipped her tea slowly, with both hands on the cup, while Caleb stared at the distant ferry ramp where passengers disappeared one by one. "Are you traveling for family?" he asked, desperate to not think about the interview that was already slipping through his fingers. "Business," she said, then added softly, "though I doubt anyone will miss me if I don't show up." Caleb gave a tight-lipped smile. "Well, I sure will. That was my last shot, I think. I had an interview today. Solar company. I was a plant guy, coal, but that's over." He didn't mean to say so much, but it came out anyway. Eleanor turned to him with those piercing blue eyes. "You helped a stranger instead of chasing your future," she said. "That's not something most people would do." He shrugged. "Maybe not, but my mama always said, if you pass someone who's down and you don't help, you just passed your own test." The ferry's final call echoed faintly. Caleb didn't look up. He already knew it was gone. The terminal had emptied out by dusk. Caleb sat alone near the far wall, hunched over with his elbows on his knees, trying to ignore the cold seeping through the metal bench. His phone was dead, and the kiosk had closed hours ago. The ferry was gone, the interview missed, and so was the last of his optimism. His backpack, which once felt like a symbol of preparedness, now felt like a suitcase of failure. He had gambled everything on this trip and had nothing left but a few bucks, a stale protein bar, and a story no one would believe. He leaned back, watching the overhead lights flicker, and tried to pretend the ache in his chest was just hunger. Then he heard it, the soft purr of a luxury car engine pulling up outside the terminal doors. Curious, he turned his head. A sleek, black electric sedan eased to a stop under the overhang, its paint reflecting the dim amber glow of the parking lights. The back door opened smoothly, and from it emerged someone startlingly familiar. Her silver hair was no longer tousled beneath a knit hat, but pinned up in a graceful twist. Her navy travel coat was gone, replaced by a tailored burgundy trench that shimmered faintly under the light. The canvas bags had vanished. In their place hung a structured handbag and the confidence of someone who belonged to another world entirely. It was Eleanor. Caleb blinked hard, wondering if exhaustion was playing tricks on him. She scanned the terminal briefly before her eyes landed on him. Her expression softened into something like relief, and she spoke a few words to the driver before making her way inside. Her footsteps were calm, assured. Gone was the frail woman who needed help with her luggage. "You shouldn't be here," she said gently, stopping in front of him. Caleb stood awkwardly, brushing off his jeans as if it would make a difference. "Didn't have anywhere else to go," he replied, managing a shrug. "Figured I'd sleep here and figure out the rest in the morning." Eleanor gave him a small, knowing smile. "Come with me," she said, nodding toward the car. "You gave up something important today for someone you didn't know. Let me take you somewhere warm, somewhere you're needed." He hesitated for only a second. There was something in her tone, quiet but resolute, that made it impossible to say no. Without a word, he followed her out into the night. The marina was quiet except for the gentle lap of water against the docks and the low hum of lights along the shoreline. Caleb followed Eleanor down the polished wooden walkway, still unsure if this was real. Docked at the end was a sleek catamaran, its white hull glowing softly under blue LED deck lights. It looked like something out of a movie. Solar panels embedded in the roof, a wind turbine at the stern, and a nameplate etched with the words, "The Meridian." The crew greeted Eleanor with subtle deference, calling her Ms. Fields, and escorting them aboard with quiet efficiency. Caleb stood stiffly on the deck, unsure where to put his calloused hands or what to say. Eleanor motioned for him to sit at a small outdoor table near the cabin, where warm lights glowed and 2 mugs of chamomile tea waited. As the catamaran eased away from the dock, cutting a silent trail across the dark water, Eleanor finally spoke. "You're wondering what this is," she said, her voice calm and even. "I do this once a year. Travel anonymously, see the world from the bottom again." Caleb stared at her. "Bottom's got a good view of the dirt," he muttered, then softened. "But it's honest." She smiled faintly. "It is, and honest people stand out like lighthouses." They spoke for hours as the boat glided toward an island estate visible only by its pinprick lights in the distance. Caleb shared how his father taught him everything about engines, not from books, but by sound. How he could hear when a machine was wrong. Eleanor listened intently, her hands wrapped around her mug, nodding occasionally but never interrupting. She told him about growing up in a town where women were expected to keep the lights on, not invent ways to power them. "I built my first solar array in a barn," she said with a laugh. "It lit 1 string of Christmas lights, and it blew the fuse box." There was laughter, and then silence, a shared one. Caleb finally asked the question, gnawing at him. "Why me?" Eleanor looked out at the water, then back at him. "Because you gave up something valuable to help a stranger. and you didn't expect anything for it. I pay attention to people like that. The stars stretched overhead, endless and quiet. Caleb leaned back, tea forgotten, heart racing, with something he hadn't felt in a long time. Morning broke gently over the water, painting the waves in soft gold as the catamaran glided into a private dock tucked beneath a cliffside villa. Caleb stood near the railing, rubbing sleep from his eyes, trying to reconcile the surreal calm of the moment with the whirlwind of the last 12 hours. Eleanor emerged from the cabin, dressed in a crisp white linen blouse and navy slacks, her silver hair pinned back neatly. She carried herself like someone who wasn't used to being questioned, yet had grown used to being underestimated. As they sat down for breakfast on the deck, overlooking the sea, Caleb finally asked the question that had been churning inside him since the night before. "So, who are you really?" Eleanor didn't flinch. She buttered a slice of toast and took a sip of her coffee before answering. "I'm the founder and CEO of Solarity Group," she said plainly. "We design and deploy renewable energy systems, solar, wind, and hybrid infrastructure. We operate in 18 countries, mostly where others won't go. I built it from a broken roof panel and an unpaid electric bill." Caleb's jaw slackened. You're Eleanor Fields?" She nodded. "In the flesh, though usually not this wrinkled," she said with a chuckle. "Every year I take a trip like this. No entourage, no announcement. I want to see how the world treats people it thinks don't matter, and I want to see who stops to care when no one's watching." Caleb leaned back in his chair, stunned. The woman he'd carried luggage for in a rain-worn coat now revealed herself as a global powerhouse in green energy. "And I was just a mechanic trying to get to a job interview," he said quietly. "That's not all you were," Eleanor replied. "You were decent, unhurried when you should have been desperate. And that's rarer than you think." She placed a manila folder on the table between them. Inside, Caleb found the outline for a new training initiative, one designed to educate and empower local energy technicians across underserved regions. "I need someone to help build this from the ground up," she said. "Someone who knows how machines work and how people grow." Caleb didn't know what to say, but something in him stirred, the part that still believed he had something valuable to offer the world. Later that afternoon, Caleb stepped into the modest office of Sunflux Innovations, tucked inside a shared tech incubator across the water. The receptionist barely looked up as she handed him a clipboard. The interview was brisk, polite, and painfully uninspired. The hiring manager, a young man with soft hands and a rehearsed smile, skimmed Caleb's resume and said things like, "We're big on synergy and we really value life experience." By the end of the meeting, Caleb had an offer. $75,000, 0 cents a year, modest benefits, and a vague promise of potential growth. It was more money than he'd seen in years, the kind of job he would have taken in a heartbeat 2 days ago. But as he sat outside with the offer letter in his lap, all he could see were Eleanor's eyes, clear, steady, waiting. That evening he met her again, this time at the top of Seattle's Sky Lounge, where the city unfolded in light beneath the panoramic glass. She greeted him with a smile that felt less mysterious now, more maternal. Over dinner, she laid it all out. The Global Technical Education Initiative would launch first in Cape Town, then expand to Brazil, Vietnam, and beyond. "We don't just need mechanics," she said. "We need mentors, builders of systems and people. You train locals, shape curriculum, hire staff. You build something that outlives both of us." Caleb stared at his glass of water. "It's a lot." "It is," Eleanor nodded. "But so is staying small when you know you're meant to grow." He told her about the Sunflux offer. She didn't mock it or dismiss it. She simply said, "That's a paycheck. I'm offering you a purpose." For a long time, he said nothing. The silence between them wasn't awkward, it was sacred. The kind of silence that demanded a real answer, not just a convenient one. He thought of his father, of dusty garages, of the years spent under fluorescent lights fixing things no one appreciated. He thought of a boy in Kenya or Vietnam who might one day fix something because he taught them how. When he finally looked up, Eleanor was watching him closely. She didn't pressure, didn't plead. Just wait. 6 months later, Caleb stood in the middle of a humming solar training facility in Seattle, surrounded by blueprints, battery cells, and the low buzz of ambition. He had traded his work boots for composite safety shoes and his oil-stained flannel for a crisp instructor's jacket with the Celerity emblem stitched above the pocket. At first he felt like an imposter. The lectures on energy storage systems, photovoltaic alignment, and inverter protocols were a different language. He was the oldest in the training cohort by a decade, and the only one who still used a notebook instead of a tablet. But slowly something shifted. The way he listened to machines, how he heard problems before others saw them, gave him an edge. The younger trainees began to notice. They started calling him Old Hawk, not out of mockery, but respect, for the way he spotted mistakes before they. Chinedu, a Nigerian engineer and Solarity's head of technical instruction, took Caleb under his wing. "You don't need to be the smartest in the room," Chinedu said one night over coffee. "You just need to be the one who makes others smarter." That stuck with Caleb. He started staying late, helping younger recruits who struggled with wiring diagrams or soldering techniques. He didn't just teach them systems, he taught them patience, grace, how to stay calm when nothing works the first time. One day, a young single mother in the program, Amina, stopped him after class. "No one ever believed I could do this kind of work," she said softly. "But the way you teach, it makes me believe I can." Caleb felt something loosen in his chest, a pressure he hadn't known he'd carried for years. He smiled and nodded, blinking faster than usual. By the time the Cape Town assignment came through, Caleb was no longer the uncertain man who had missed a ferry and nearly given up. He had become something more, a teacher, a builder, a man who didn't just fix broken systems. He helped people see the light. As he packed his tools for the long flight, he tucked Amina's note in with them. It read, "Thank you for showing me how to turn on more than just the lights." The sun was just beginning to crest over the Cape Flats when Caleb stepped onto the observation deck of the new Celerity Training Institute of Cape Town. Below him, rows of solar panels shimmered like armor in the morning light, and the crisp coastal air carried a faint scent of salt and clay. It had been 18 months since he first said yes to Eleanor Fields, and this moment, this view, was the proof that decision had mattered. Inside the main building, students in teal and gold uniforms bustled about with toolkits, measuring tape and drill belts slung across their shoulders. Most of them were under 25, many had never finished secondary school, but now they spoke fluently about voltage regulation, microinverters, and sun angles, and they called him Mr. Caleb, a title that still made him smile every time. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was set for 10 a.m., and officials from the South African Ministry of Energy were already assembling beneath the ceremonial canopy. Eleanor arrived fashionably late, of course, dressed in a light linen suit with her signature silver hair pinned back and a cane she barely used. Caleb met her at the entrance, and they exchanged a brief, wordless smile. She handed him a small, elegantly wrapped box. "Open it later," she whispered. "It's sentimental." As speeches began, Caleb stood at the podium scanning the crowd. Amina had flown in to attend, so had Chinedu. There were graduates, parents, local leaders, all standing beneath a banner that read, "Where old power ends, new light begins." It was Eleanor's phrase. She had insisted on it. Marketing hated it, but Caleb knew she was right. When the time came to unveil the dedication plaque, Eleanor beckoned him forward. Together they pulled the gold cord and revealed the polished bronze slab. It bore the Celerity emblem, the date, and one simple sentence, etched in both English and Xhosa. "This place was built on kindness." Afterward, as music played and cameras flashed, Eleanor pressed the box into his hands once more. "Now," she said. Inside was a keychain, a miniature of the suitcase he'd carried for her that day at the terminal, cast in polished silver. On the underside was an engraving. "Thank you for choosing to carry more than bags." Caleb stared at it, overcome. Around him, students laughed and celebrated, but for a moment, all he could do was close his hand around that small weight and hold still. It was the lightest thing he'd ever carried, and the heaviest. 3 weeks after the Cape Town ceremony, Caleb sat in the open-air cafe of a Nairobi guest house, sipping strong black tea and reviewing blueprints under the warm East African sun. The invitation had come quickly. Eleanor wanted him to lead the launch of Solarity's next institute in Vietnam, but first she asked if he'd stop in Kenya to evaluate a pilot program already underway. The flight had been long, the transitions swift, but Caleb no longer hesitated when purpose called. He had grown into the man Eleanor once saw in a ferry terminal, the man who lifted more than just luggage. He watched a group of Kenyan apprentices wiring a mobile solar cart across the street, each one focused, efficient, proud. They didn't know his story, but they carried its legacy in their hands. That evening, a familiar black car pulled up outside the Institute's temporary headquarters. Eleanor stepped out slowly, her stride measured but dignified. She greeted the staff, then made her way to Caleb, who was watching the sunset from the balcony. She didn't say anything at first, just joined him, the silence between them comfortable and earned. Then she spoke. "You remember what I said about seeing the world from the bottom?" He nodded. "You said people look different from down there. So does the horizon." Eleanor smiled. "And now, you're helping others reach it." She handed him a thin folder with plans for the Vietnam site. "It's yours, if you want it." Caleb opened it, scanning the layout, the curriculum plan, the logistics. He could already see it coming to life. "I do," he said simply. She turned to leave, but paused. "You've exceeded every expectation, Caleb. You're not just building systems, you're building people." He watched her go, then turned back to the city unfolding below. Lights flickered across rooftops, powered by the panels his students had installed. Somewhere, a child would read by that light, a nurse would sterilize her tools, a family would eat dinner without smoke in their lungs. Caleb closed the folder and stood, ready for the next chapter. Because somewhere in the world right now, someone was making a choice, to keep walking or to stop and help. And he knew more than ever that the smallest kindness could carry you farther than any ferry ever could. The story of Caleb Monroe teaches us that life's most meaningful opportunities often come disguised as small, inconvenient moments of compassion. When Caleb chose to help an elderly woman instead of rushing to secure his future, he unknowingly walked into his real purpose, not just a job, but a legacy. His act of kindness, quiet and unrecognized at the time, became the turning point that launched a new chapter of impact, growth, and global service. For an audience aged 50 and above, the story is a reminder that it's never too late to be seen, to matter, or to begin again. The skills we carry, the values we uphold, and the way we treat people when no one is watching, these are the things that define us, far more than titles or resumes ever could. Caleb didn't just fix solar panels. He helped build communities, train the next generation, and restored power, not just in homes, but in hearts. The lesson is clear. Kindness is not a detour, it's the path. And sometimes, what feels like a missed opportunity is actually the gateway to a greater destiny.